Hello friends, this is Oz.
And this is Lada.
Welcome to the first episode of Project Earth Shift.
Hello, today we are starting a new series of videos called Project Earth Shift. Those who read my blog Futurist Trendcast are familiar with my motto: our past, present and future, beyond the obvious. This is what we discuss and reveal on the blog. In the Project Earth Shift, we will go further and reveal piece by piece the elements of my Earth Shift system. It unites in one our past, present and future, and goes well beyond that by predicting and explaining the phenomena of the present and the future from the point of view of my mystical futurism. I invented this term to best explain what I do when I predict events. Today, we start with the universal scale of consciousness. What is it? Let me explain it this way. Suppose you go to the store to buy a new car or a new coat or a new pair of shoes. Wouldn't it be great if you knew that your purchase will actually enhance your life, will become life-affirming for you, or whether it will drag you down and will become life-diminishing? Say you become a slave to your purchase. You purchase a new house. Will that benefit not only your growth and your physical being, but also your soul development? Or will it tie you down, or will it drag you down, and again you will become miserable, a slave to your property, not being able to go out because you need to cut your grass? Or clean up the house, or cook, etc., etc. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you were seeing the girl of your dreams, but you would like to know whether that girl really loves you, or she's just looking for a marriage of convenience? Or wouldn't it be wonderful if you were that girl and you wanted to know whether the guy really loves you, or the clock is ticking for him, and so he decides to get married before he gets too old and no girl would look at him? And there are many examples like that. You would like to know whether going into a new career, accepting a new job, whether that is the right thing to do. Or, for example, country-to-country negotiations or company-to-company negotiations. By knowing how to calibrate, you will know whether your counterpart in another country or another company, how they feel about you, whether you can trust them. This is just a general overview, and now we will proceed to the actual calibrations. The universal scale of consciousness is my term, the term used and first proposed by David Hawkins, PhD, in his book Power versus Force, is called the human scale of consciousness. The scale of consciousness is numeric. It starts at 0, which is the level of death or near death. And then it proceeds, it goes through many values to the level of pure enlightenment, and that's 1000. According to David Hawkins, calibration or energy vibration, in other words, above 1000 cannot be sustained by the human system in a fully incarnated 3D world in the earthly realm. However, I disagree with that. I have been calibrating objects and certain energies that are well below 1000, and there's no problem. You just need to, I believe some of the lower vibrated individuals cannot even perceive that which calibrates above 1000. And those who are highly calibrated enough actually can perceive those higher than 1000 vibrations and can benefit from them, can distinguish them and can feel them and can benefit, can actually draw on that energy as well. So we are going to start with the lowest vibrations and proceed in our scale up until we reach in the next episode truly life-affirming and beautiful vibrations. When I say vibration, that's the energy vibration at the level at which any individual, any object, any event in history, in politics, any agreement, say, signed between companies, anything that surrounds us in our world and our inner world as well, our inner calibration, the vibration of our chakras, all this can be expressed numerically to give you a roadmap as to what is really happening around you and inside of you, whether you're going in the right direction in your life. It gives you a good idea of how people around you feel about you, or how their behavior, for example, affects you and others in your life. It can be expressed on the macro level for the entire earth, for country to country. As I go along, you will understand what I mean by all this. So let's just say human emotions, they influence us all, and you can understand another human being better when you know what kind of emotion, what numeric value you can assign to a specific emotion. For example, somebody is experiencing grief. You will understand the person better if you can calibrate and understand what level what they're doing or how they're feeling is expressed at. So as I said, at 0, we get the level of death. Then we proceed slightly higher, and the level of 20, that's the level of shame. Shame is actually the lowest vibration at which life is marginally even possible. This is the level at which harakiri in Japan calibrates. So a samurai who's been ashamed of something might commit suicide, might commit harakiri, literally sniffing the life out of his hara, in order to atone for his sins, whether he committed that sin or not, or this is a perception of the society. Another possibility for how shame might actually evolve is in the olden days, when women had no rights and no voice. Say if somebody rapes a young girl and she's too ashamed to admit it, she might commit suicide instead of going and complaining about it. Well, thankfully we don't live in times like that anymore, but that is a historic example of shame. Actually, shame is something that is very characteristical of Eastern cultures, more so than Western cultures, and very characteristical, in fact, of the Japanese culture even to this day. The thing that is very effective, that works very effectively apparently in the Japanese culture. Another example of shame is shunning that occurs to somebody who committed some kind of crime or mishap in the Amish society. And shunning and shame shame is the same root, the same word really. Shutting somebody out, right? Shut, shun, shame is the same root that evolved over time and became slightly different, with slightly different meanings. Above the level of shame, on the level of 30, is the level of guilt. Guilt is something a lot of Catholics understand very well. Those who went to Sunday Catholic school understand guilt very well. I'm not going to go too deep into that. This is just very similar to shame, but slightly higher. And this guilt oftentimes is very misplaced. Also in some older cultures, what is called the old country, that is something that oftentimes mothers would instill in their children. Remember the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Thank you very much. Yes. where Tula was talking about her mother, and she would say, "Oh, my mother," and she would always serve us dinner with a good serving of good old guilt. Or say, "Eat, Tula, eat well, because when I grew up, we didn't have anything like this, any such food, so you better eat it." That's your typical guilt. That's transferring something, some hardship on, or some disappointment of your own life onto your children or somebody else by guilt tripping them. Or if you don't do this for me, I'm gonna suffer, or poor little me, if you don't do this for me, then it will be harder for me to exist in the world. This is how guilt works. Oftentimes guilt becomes a really suicidal thing as well when it's taken to its extreme. Not as suicidal as shame, but which almost invariably results in a suicide, specifically suicide. These are when you inflict damage on yourself. But guilt and shame as well can result in self-mutilation or self-flagellation, like some fanatics, different religious fanatics do to themselves. Higher than guilt is apathy. It calibrates at 50. And when you move into apathy, it's pretty much when somebody gives up on everything. Well, we talk on my blog oftentimes about what is happening in Ukraine. And so I give an example that people in Ukraine have become so apathetic because they are completely disappointed in their country. The country has been taken over by very violent fascist Nazi thugs who go from place to place, burn people alive like they did in Odessa, the beautiful city where I grew up. They create all these very violent situations. They bomb their own citizens. So in certain places, people have just become apathetic. And so when they had elections into their parliament, very few voted in southern Ukraine, what is now southern Ukraine, cities like Nikolaev or Kherson, for example. And that's your apathy. Apathy is also Calcutta of old, the time of Mother Teresa when she worked there. A lot of the very poor people, so poor, so destitute. Apathy can also be described as being destitute. Apathy is the calibration of the homeless, of many homeless people, and also of those extremely poor in Calcutta. So poverty, destitution, and apathy go hand in hand. Well, above apathy is grief. Grief, although a terrible, usually very tragic kind of emotion and kind of feeling, is still carries much more energy than the energy of apathy or the ones below it. Grief can be more like a pathetic grief when a person is just sitting and crying and doesn't want to see anything around them. Apathy and grief work together a lot, and also guilt comes into that, like survivor's guilt when you lost somebody, for example, or the guilt that you didn't love them as much as perhaps you should have, which usually is, by the way, misplaced because you cannot think straight when you're in grief mode. But also grief can be more active, and then it becomes violent. It starts with when you start screaming on somebody else and blaming them for somebody else's death just because you cannot bear the weight of your grief multiplied by guilt. And then there is the darkest grief when somebody becomes a terrorist. Like, for example, everybody probably heard about these black widows, these Muslim terrorists, who usually are the widows of some terrorist who has been already taken out by special services, for example. And so they strap those explosives, they go into some kind of very populated area like a subway, a train, or rock concert, and try to blow themselves up there. This is the example of grief. Or something like this terrorist organizations like ISIS, or Al-Qaeda. These are the kind of people who go there. Chechen terrorists belong to this category. This is that extreme level of grief that makes you violent back. In my short novelette, Green Desert, I'm actually describing that kind of grief when a young man from Iraq becomes a terrorist after an American bomb kills his entire family. Now we're jumping to the next level, the level of 100, which is the first level, which is not as life diminishing, that it almost invariably results in death or comes out of death. This is the level of fear. The level of fear at 100 is the first level where a person already hangs on to life, to their own life. They usually do not care about anybody else's life. So it's an extremely egotistical level. If levels below 100 didn't value either their own or somebody else's life, there was no value to any life whatsoever. Basically, they were all rushing towards death, towards the cemetery, so to speak. At the level of fear, there is fear of dying. There's fear of being destitute. There's fear of not having enough money in retirement, not getting married on time so that later you are not sitting pretty, for example. The fear of not getting the best job you possibly can. In other words, your own life and your own well-being from fear is valued. But you do not care about anybody else. That's the level of fear. Well, the very next level at 125 is the level of greed. And greed is something that works very well with fear. They have this mutual reception between the two of them. The level of greed, what I call greed, some call desire, including David Hawkins. I somewhat disagree, because desire to me is something much more positive. It is a life-affirming sensation or emotion, desire. You desire to be friends with somebody. You desire to create. You desire to grow. There's nothing wrong with that. If you desire something negative, yeah, that's a different story. But I believe that that falls under different categories. So greed, that's a more appropriate a name for the 125 level. At this level, you want something really, really badly, and it's always material. It's never spiritual. It's never something that would benefit others. You want it for yourself. So fear and greed are egotistical levels, purely egotistical levels. You never think about anybody else but yourself. On the level of greed, for example, I want this new car, or I want that big house on the hill, or I want that pink iPhone 6 for girls, or I want that Ferrari, or I want this the latest Armani shoes. That's your level of greed. Or I want to be filthy rich. And as we know, Wall Street and runs on greed and fear. It vacillates between the two. Now, we proceed to the level of anger. The level of anger at 150 is a very highly charged level. Level of anger at 150 is still life diminishing, but it can work both negatively and positively. It works negatively when you are, say, most sports calibrate, team sports calibrate at the level of anger all the time. American football, baseball, level of anger through and through. European football, called soccer in America, calibrates at 150 level. Everybody knows, everybody has seen on TV and on YouTube these very violent fans that go around crushing cars, burning them, fighting with police, with bats, yelling at each other, and even throwing rocks at the team they don't like on the field. That's gone that far. So these sports are on the level of anger. Most other sports are actually above that, well above that. Even basketball is above the level of anger. It's a much more sophisticated game than that. Hockey is much higher than the level of anger as well. It's usually courage. So the sports I named, that's the level of anger. Now, the people who take up the arms, and start the aggression against another country, that's the level of anger. Most aggressions in the world are at the level of anger, but also at the level of greed, because they want something another country has that they don't, and they want it for themselves. So like fascist aggression in the World War II, that was at the level of anger. It was highly charged with energy, but with very dark, extremely dark energy that wanted to basically eliminate life and harm life everywhere. And by being that, it actually descended to the level of shame, and from there on it went all the way to death, to zero. So it started out as anger and ended up as death. So that's the negative direction of anger. The positive direction of anger is when somebody was apathetic, like those people I described in Ukraine who didn't even vote. But when they start bombing their homes somewhere in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, then they take up the arms and they go and they get so angry, they start protecting their homeland. At that point, they will rise to higher levels, which we'll discuss in the second video, which will be the first positive level called courage. But anger is that step in the right direction when you are getting out of the closet and get angry to start acting, doing something. Then you can rise higher after that. So that's the positive direction of anger. The next level is the level of pride. This is actually the very first level at which life of others is sufficiently respected. You respect yourself enough at the level of pride to respect others, because you already understand at the level of 175 and above, you already come to the understanding that you don't want to fight, because you know that when you fight, somebody else will fight back. And so you get to that level, and you start, because you have no choice, you start respecting somebody else. The level of pride is still not a life-affirming level. It's right below it. But it's already the level at which you can talk to other people. Most politicians in the world calibrate at this level. There are exceptions to this rule, and possibly one day we will discuss that as well. There are some really amazing politicians, statesmen really, they're not politicians. There are well above this level, well above, but that's a different story. At 175, 180, 85 is keeping up with the Joneses. That's the kind of level we're talking about. That's the kind of vibration. I want my McMansion because the Joneses have that. I want the best car, or I want to best those Joneses. I want the best job. I want a good-looking wife, or I want a rich husband. This is all I want it for pride. So this works very well with greed, actually. Greed and pride oftentimes go hand in hand. This level is the level of global politics and the level of diplomats as well, because they understand that they have to talk to each other only if so that not to start the war, because they value themselves so much that they don't want a war to coming to their threshold if they do something wrong. This is their motivation. It's not like higher motivations when people actually want to extend the hand of friendship or cooperation because of willingness, or because they deem that this is love is the only way of life on earth. This is a different story. They're so egotistical that they are willing to talk to others because they value their own peace and quiet so much. This is their motivation. So there is a big difference here. Now, This is my own addition to the Hawkins scale of consciousness. So far, we've been discussing his levels with my additional notes and my additional understandings. I have added a new level. Usually, he describes pride as 175 value through 199. At 200, we will start the first life-affirming value, which will be discussed in the next episode. But I end pride at 190. At 190 through 199, I add a new category. I call that category yearning or striving. I will explain. This is above pride, but this is just below the first life-affirming vibration. Yearning is you understand that there's something more out there. It's you strive to achieve it, but you're not quite getting there. I have observed this kind of vibration with longing. People have longing in their eyes. Why can't I break through this barrier, which is the 200 value? What is it that preventing me? I seem to have all the pieces in place, but what is preventing them is something that is keeping them behind in the categories we just discussed. It could be shame about something or guilt about something, or it could be some kind of fear. Fear is a big thing here, by the way. Fear oftentimes keeps people anchored to their past, not allowing them to move to the future. They already know that they're ready to move on, but something is not letting them. So they are in this in-between world, in the twilight zone, called yearning or striving. So yearning or striving can oftentimes be observed in the eyes of some spiritual seekers who are unable to really break through into courage, into the following category, and then move on to higher calibrations, who are still being held back by fear or some kind of guilt from their Catholic past, perhaps, but who are striving with all their might to get somewhere better. Also, in the eyes of the salespeople, you can see yearning or striving, because they so depend on their sales commissions all the time that their life becomes always unstable and always generates this uncertainty, fear, greed all the time. And so they might actually be yearning to be on much higher levels, but they're unable to break away from the fear and greed that are pulling them back. Okay, I hope this was helpful. This is the end of today's first episode. I promise next time we will start getting into the categories that are really exciting. Starting with courage, which is the first life-affirming category, life-sustaining, life-affirming, something that propels you to the very next level that you cannot achieve below it. This is all for today.
Thank you all for listening. This is the first episode of Project Earthshift.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.